This is a historical recount of the most amazing woman that I have ever encountered in my life. She was not only my favorite family member outside of my parents, but also had no issues exclaiming that I was her favorite grandchild. The name of this woman is Alma Mitchell, born February 14, 1914, is Alma Conley in Missouri. She was born into a very tough life. Little did she know she would live through some of the most significant events in history. As a young girl, her family didn't have much. They decided to migrate to the state of Texas in a covered wagon. I can recall her telling me how she used to take a branch off a tree and chew on it until the end was rough to use as a toothbrush. The migration wasn't easy. With her parents and 14 siblings, the Conley family gathered in their covered wagon with what little belongings they could bring with them and started on the trek that would bring them to the great state of Bear, Texas. Stopping when they had to, the conditions weren't ideal. It being summer, the days were scorching through the Midwest and the nights weren't much different. Having to makeshift a fire to cook food or eat what preservatives they had brought, it was enough to build the tough character that would become Alma Mitchell. Post-Roaring 20s, from the age of 15 to 25, Alma and her family went through one of the hardest periods in American history, the Great Depression. Her family was heavily affected by the financial crisis, causing her to have to work in order to help support her family and siblings. The Great Depression was the worst ever economic downturn of the industrialized world in history, from 1929 to 1939. This downfall was caused after the stock market crash in October 1929, sending Wall Street into mass chaos and panic, wiping out millions of investors. Shortly after the end of the Great Depression, the U.S. entered World War II in 1941, giving her parents the ability to work and support the children again. Soon after migrating to Texas, Alma had met her first husband. Only after a year they parted ways. Fortunately, she met her second husband, Charles Mitchell, who gave her 3 daughters, one of whom, named Margaret, would marry Benjamin Abernathy and would birth my aunt and my father Kenneth. Focusing on her work, she bought a hotel across from the train depot and worked extremely hard as the train brought many travelers and railroad workers. Along with owning it, she also washed the sheets and cleaned the rooms to turn over for the next guest. Margaret was a young girl during this time and recalled having a massive garden at their house in Bear, Texas, where Alma would also be out in the garden working hard, canning vegetables, and making berry jam. Her blackberry jam would become one of my favorite treats when visiting her in the summer. Alma's greatest passion was baking desserts. Both my grandmother Margaret and my father Kenneth recall Alma creating these delicious pies and cobblers, going to elaborate lengths, especially when invited to dinner parties, with Kenneth, her favorite grandchild, saying, "There was always a fresh, warm blackberry cobbler waiting for me when I came over." If she was invited to dinner somewhere, she'd always fuss about making the perfect dessert to take. After talking to my father more, he said that Alma was even a bootlegger. The county they lived in, Callahan County, was considered dry, which means liquor wasn't prohibited still. So her family would drive to a wet county, buy cases of whiskey, and sell it to people in Bear, Texas. Margaret recalled that she remembers going to the backyard to dig up the cases to proportion out for the buyers. My dad also claimed to have remembered going in the back to uncover the hidden alcohol when he was very young. My father was very fond of her, as he spent every summer there after baseball and developed a strong bond with her and her delicious cooking. After meeting my mother in high school and marrying shortly after, my parents struggled with their fertility, so on December 25, 1994, I was adopted into the family. Alma was so elated to have her first great-granddaughter, so the title of favorite grandchild was quickly moved to me. Alma quickly became my favorite as my great-grandmother and was there to support me for most of my life. From Christmases to my baptism to spending summers at her house just as my dad did, she was there with open arms and freshly baked desserts. Seeing her was a highlight of my early childhood memories, and I will always cherish them. From her early life to the migration to Texas in the Dust Bowl period, to living through the Great Depression, to bootlegging, and starting a family, she was always considered a pistol of a woman. She did not sit down for long, as my dad recalled, and was always doing something. She went boating and hunting with my father in her 80s and kept driving a car until she was 99 years old. She would wake up, do her makeup, and keep her nails nice, bright, and red every day until she passed. There's so much more that could be said about this woman, but the last thing I will say is that she had a heart of gold, and her kindness was felt until the last day of her life. She lived to see 103 years of history.